Okay, so let's just do a little bit of review. So last week we read the Rav's words, um, and we saw how the Rav approached Chumash in general, and then specifically how he looked at the Tanakh personalities. So actually, this week I want to conduct this year maybe a little bit more give and take, just because I think people learn better that way, and that was really the way I ran it when I taught it as a college course. So, does anyone want to contribute? Does anyone remember how did the Rav view the study of Tanakh? Anyone want to comment on that? Anything they remember from last time? Okay, maybe a little too early in the morning. Maybe as we go along, people will chime in. Okay, so basically we saw first that he looked at the Chumash not as a book of history, but spiritual destiny. And then we also saw how he believed um, that the way Jewish people understand the Tanakh personalities, that they are real, they're in the present with us, they're not just bygones. And then we began analyzing his use of typology. We discussed the concept of typology, a pure type. When the Rav calls someone halachic man, he's referring to a possibility, an abstract idea, not an exact match to a specific halachic man, because no one could be fit in exactly. It's just a paradigm for us to follow. And we saw how he did this in halachic man, and then we saw how he did it um, in the Chumash. We started looking at Adam and Chava, and the article in Family Redeemed, the essay Adam and Eve. He definitely portrayed Adam as a type. He wasn't, you didn't get the feeling he was talking about Adam Harishon, the man. He was talking about man with a capital M. Okay, so that's where we left off. So now I'd like to continue a little bit on the subject of typology and then move into the next idea, which is how he treats the Avot starting from Avraham, which is a little bit different. Okay, so I want to share something from The Lonely Man of Faith. Okay, I unblurred my background, so pardon if you see my little educational posters, because in my other life I am a reading coach and I actually have a private practice here teaching kids how to read. Okay, but this way you can see the books clearly, hence the unblurred background. So this is The Lonely Man of Faith. I showed it to you last time as well. So the Rav wrote this much later than Halachic Man, which was published in 1944. Lonely Man of Faith was first published as an article in Tradition magazine in 1965, and then many years later came out as a book, the one I showed you, and I think now there's a reprint of the book, I think from Maggid Books. Okay, now the book itself, The Lonely Man of Faith, just curious by show of hands or people, shout outs. Anyone familiar with The Lonely Man of Faith? Anyone ever read that one? Okay, so I see probably more hands than Halachic Man. So there's a reason for that. The Lonely Man of Faith is easier to read. It still has challenging vocabulary. We're going to go into it a little bit, but um, just not quite as full of philosophical terminology. And it's also different in a more important way. So really, there is a shift in the Rav's philosophy. Halachic man is what's called a phenomenological approach, where coming from the word phenomena, so he's basically investigating and describing phenomena as consciously experienced in halachic man, what it is like. He's describing what halachic man is like, what he thinks, what he does, how he approaches the Torah, the world, God. Um, Lonely Man of Faith represent a little bit shift in the Rav's approach, or perhaps even a major shift. It's considered an existential book based on existential philosophy, which is interpreting human existence in the world, stressing the world's concreteness and its problematic character. So just from that alone, you hear it's a little bit also of a darker presentation, because in Halachic Man, At the end, he shows how the two halves of halakhic man, which are split into cognitive man and homo religiosus, end up resolving their differences and combining through the halakhic man's study of Torah into one unique but whole and positive individual. While in the Lonely Man of Faith, those of you who read it, and those of you who will hopefully one day take a look at it, a lonely man remains lonely. He's also split into two types. He has, on one hand, he is majestic man, the strong, conquering, Milu es haaretz, Ridu b'degas hayam, and on the other hand, he has a different half, covenantal man, pulling him in a different way, a spiritual way, closer to the why of existence and getting close to God. And according to the Rav, at least on this world, the way it is today, that will never be resolved. Okay. So I'm going to now share the screen because the point of this is not to analyze the two books philosophically, but to see how does he portray Adam Harishon in The Lonely Man of Faith. So let me share the screen here. Okay, so let us portray these two men, Adam the first and Adam the second. So that's what he calls Adam the first is majestic man, and Adam the second is covenantal man, in typological categories. So here, right out there, he says he's presenting them as a typology. He's not talking about Adam as a real person, so to speak. So I'll just read a little bit. There is no doubt that the term image of God in the first account refers to man's inner charismatic endowment as a creative being. So I'll just mention quickly that he gets his proof text, so to speak, from Perek Aleph and Perek Beis of Bereshis. Perek Aleph presents Adam one way and Perek Beis in another way. And Bible critics have argued that this is proof that the Torah was written by two different people, chas v'shalom, but the Rav shows how really it's just presenting two sides of the same person. And in a way, you could say that this book is the Rav's answer to biblical criticism. He says at the beginning, I never let it bother me, but really the book in a way is, you could view it as one long polemic against people who say it's two authors. Adam the first, who was fashioned in the image of God, was blessed with great drive for creative activity and immeasurable resources for the realization of this goal, the most outstanding of which is the intelligence, the human mind, capable of confronting the outside world and inquiring into its complex workings. So Adam the first is curious, wants to figure out how the world is put together, and he gave him the mandate to subdue nature, use his intellect. Okay. He continues here. What is Adam the first out to achieve? What is the objective towards which he incessantly drives himself with enormous speed? So I think it's pretty clear he's not talking about Adam Harishon. He's talking about this typological archetype of this aspect of man. So he does capitalize Adam, but in my opinion, he is not bringing Adam Harishon to life, delving into his particular individuality. The objective, it is self-evidence, can be only one, namely that which God put up before him, to be man, to be himself. Adam the first wants to be human, to discover his identity, which is bound up with his humanity. How does Adam find himself? Okay, so I'm just going to stop here because the point was just to show you how he refers to Adam as a general paradigm for us to think about ourselves and not on Harishon. And just going back to the Adam and Eve essay, which we looked at last time, the purpose of this paper is to gain an insight into the nature and the destiny of woman and man whom God created in a specific way, and to begin to formulate on the basis of these insights a philosophy of man. So again, he's saying straight out that he is trying to look at the bigger picture over here. Okay, so I am going to go down to the end of this booklet. Okay, any questions on the Rav's biblical typology before I go on? Because now I am going to be moving into a different way, a different move that the Rav makes when he analyzes the Avos starting from Avram Avinu. Okay, good. We're all on the same page here. Fine. So let me tell you where this page is from. It's from another book called Halachic Morality, which came out a while ago, put out by Maggid Press, and it's essays on ethics and the Masorah. Quite a few of them are about Pirkei Avos, so that is interesting. I believe the Rav did give shiurim on Perek, and this excerpt is actually from, I think, the first essay over there. So what he is, oh, here it is, From Sinai to the Men of the Great Assembly. So this essay starts out, he analyzing the Anshe Knesset Agdola, and the Rav points out that even though they achieved tremendous things, including creating the davening that we still daven today, so many years later, we don't really know who they are. We know very few of their names, and even those who we know their names, we know basically nothing about their personal individual histories of what really happened to them. So then the Rav extrapolates from here to more than just Anshe Knesset Agdola. He says something about the biblical and the Masorah heroes. So I'm going to read this paragraph and let's see if we can unpack it together. The biblical and Masorah heroes must be treated under a double aspect. First, they are treated as ideas, or rather ideals, as hypostasized abstractions. Hypostasized means to give a real identity to something that is more abstract or conceptual. Setting standards of conduct. These ideas have been crystallized into a living personality who succeeded in emerging from the shadows of ontic seclusion. Ontic means existence or being, meaning an existence of seclusion, and joining others in a great venture of living together and coexisting. So this is one way the biblical personalities and the Masorah heroes are presented. Okay, I'm going to go on to the second, and then we'll look at both. Second, they are treated as individuals who could not free themselves from the ontic confinement into which their creator cast them. However hard they tried to liberate themselves from the shackles of otherness, incommensurability, and nonconformity, they failed to tear down the Jericho walls surrounding their lonely existence and resign themselves to the fate of living for themselves, within themselves, and by themselves. So I'm going to stop here. We will continue reading in a minute. So the Rav says there are two sides to the personalities in Tanakh and the Masorah personalities, meaning the Tanam, Amaram, and then all the way down Rishonim, Achronim. Okay, does anyone want to, why don't you take a minute and maybe reread this bit? And if anybody wants to volunteer and explain either what the first part is describing and what the second part is describing, like how are they different? How are the two sides of, or their two realities different?
Hmm. Well, for one thing, they are heroes, but they are not perfect. They are flawed heroes.
Okay, so that they're real people, individuals, that's what you mean with real personalities. And they're human beings. Okay, good. Thank you. Anyone else?
I think what they're saying is also the fact that the people that they were in order to be who they were giving of themselves to the nation made them a certain insular way, and they couldn't be other than that in order to provide what they were providing. That they what enabled them to be the light into the nation, the light to the rest of the Jewish people, giving over the Masorah, made them of a certain lifestyle in terms of interactions with others, that they stayed within the confines of those ideals, and that made them separate a certain amount.
Okay, very good. Anybody else?
Would
I
it
guess their
be,
own, oh, sorry.
sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Their own unique personalities also had to be incorporated into the unity of the people. Um,
Okay,
diversity and unity.
right. So we're seeing two sort of a dialectical dilemma, which the Rav loves dialect. And then somebody else was about to say something.
I was just going to say, could we look at it as the Torah tells us about their story, what happened to them, but we don't really know what they felt like inside, what they were like, and how they felt inside.
Okay, so really, I think it's a combination of what everybody said. So the first is their persona when they were with the people, when they were guiding them, lighting their way. So they had to come out of their personal seclusion, out of their individual role, and be among the people. So that was one side of their existence. Um, but they're also individuals. The second one is referring to them as their personal individual existence, which here the Rav is arguing that because that they had to most of the time be that paradigm, that hero, that typology, if you will, they really could never emerge as their individual personalities. We know because in this essay he is talking about how we really know very little about the lives of the Tanakh figures, their personalities. So they couldn't come out of their shell, so to speak, and be who they really were on a personal level. So I'm going to continue now. There is the universal Abraham and also the individual Abraham. Moses within the community and Moses in his tent far away from the people. They were great in both roles. Yet, while in their first role, they have been perpetuated in history, in their second one, they have become a great enigma, an unknown being, a persona abscondita, who meaning a vanishing or hidden personality who is mysterious and incomprehensible. And then he goes on to compare them to God himself. God himself is experienced in this dual role, as does Revelatus, meaning the revealed God, sharing his existence with others, keeping us company, omnipresent and all-enveloping, and on the other hand, as numinous and dreadful, unapproachable and hidden. Okay, so I'm using that little piece to segue into the next part of this course, the way the Rav portrayed the Avos. So I am going to argue that on one hand, he does continue to portray them as typologies, as abstract types that we can learn from, but in a way detached from who they really were as individuals. But on the other hand, something new he adds in to his essays, recordings, etc., is that he actually treats the Avos as individuals, even though what we just read shows us that there is very little for us to go on in the Chumash itself about what happened. Abraham comes onto the stage when he's 75 years old. Of course, we have the Midrashim, but we don't have we don't have too many personal stories before that. So that is going to be our next task, to see how Rav Soloveitchik does this. Okay. So I am now going to share again. I'm just switching handouts here. Okay, so this first essay is taken from Abraham's Journey, which I showed last time, but perhaps it was a bit blurred, so here it is. This is put out by the Torah Sarav Foundation, and it's reflections on the life of the founding patriarch. It's taken from mostly his recordings, manuscripts, and they transcribed it into very, very beautiful and insightful essays. Okay, so let's read how Rav Soloveitchik is talking about Avraham Avinu here. The name of this essay is A Wandering Aramean, Arami Oved Avi. So he translates Oved as wandering and not as destroying. Okay. Disengagement, the main theme of prophecy, can be traced back to the very dawn of our history, to Abraham. Abraham had to go, mimoladatecha, from your birthplace. The prophet must remove himself from his native environment. The environment into which we are born determines the way of our thinking, feeling, and striving. We think in terms of and via media with which we were confronted as a child. And here he puts in a personal anecdote, which is always nice. I still see my father and mother the way they looked when I was young, not the way they looked later in their old age. I have wandered from place to place. I have prayed in many synagogues. I have sat in many sukkot. I have celebrated many Seder nights. However, when I visualize a Yom Kippur service, I see the Beit HaMidrash HaGadol in Chaslavich, where I davened as a child, where I stood next to my father. When I reminisce, the environment of my childhood is reflected by those memories. To forget these pictures means to terminate one's identity. Memory is the very foundation of human identity, and if memory is cut off, the personality shrinks. And yet, God told Abraham to forget. Okay, so I want to focus here not on the Rav's reminiscence, which actually we'll get back to in a later bit, but over here, what he said about prophecy, that Abraham was pretty much the first prophet. And here he's saying the prophet must remove himself from his environment. That is something that the Rav believed to be true, that in order to be a Navi, you had to spend some time isolated away from the community. And we'll look at a little bit more here at the bottom. A prophet is a wanderer, navinad, a nomad. He dwells wherever God wills him to abide. He must not be a man of property and rest. And the Lord said to Abraham, go forth from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house. Be always on the go. Move continually from place to place. Don't settle down. You have a task to fulfill, a message to put across. You must keep moving. Do not wait for people to come to you. In this verse, the Torah describes the destiny of the prophet. So I'm going to stop here for a minute and ask you, how is he portraying Avraham in this section of the essay? Is it as a typology, a paradigm of something for us to understand? Or do you feel like he's talking about Avram, the person, the individual, with emotions, feelings, humanity? Okay, there's really no right and wrong here. It's your opinion. I mean, I'll share my opinion afterward, but
I think you can kind of combine the two because he's saying he's a prophet, he's a wanderer, and that could be compared to the prophets and the later prophets in the Nevi'im and Ketuvim. And he's saying that he's the prototype for them, that he wandered a lot, that he didn't stay in one place, and that is what's going to be for the future generations, perhaps. And that you have to separate yourself out on one hand, but on the other hand, you must keep moving so that it's, I don't know,
okay,
it sort of
so you see
seems
a
to
little
be,
bit of both, you're
it's a little
saying.
bit of both.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so it's interesting you point that out, Tova, because in that article that we looked at last week, The Typology of Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik by Rabbi Borowitz. He describes what the Rav does as pure possibilities of existence, but later in that essay, we didn't read that bit inside. He said sometimes it gets confusing because the Rav will, in the same essay, maybe sometimes even on the same page, he'll present a typology, but then he will segue into a more personal or individual reading of that personality, and it could get a little confusing, he felt.
I think
Okay.
perhaps, maybe he was talking to the time period. They were so into psychedelics and they were looking for stuff, and he was giving people an opportunity to look deeper into their livelihood, into their lives a certain amount. So maybe that's why.
So actually, we're going to get to that piece in two times. It's called In Their Shoes, about the personal connection. So in my opinion, I guess, I'm comparing it to other renditions of Avram, which I will share soon. This is overall typology. He is presenting Abraham as the quintessential prophet, and he derives from what happened. Yes, it did happen to Abraham in his life that he had to be cut off from society, but he is using that, holding that up as an example for all Nevi'im for the future, that they have to separate from their family, and isolate themselves. Why they have to do it, that's another shiur, which I will not get into now. Okay. All right, this is just a little bit more of the same, where he actually quotes from the Rambam and shows how a prophet has to withdraw himself from the ways of the ordinary run of men who walk in the obscurities of the times. But keeping his mind disengaged, concentrated on higher things as though bound beneath the celestial throne. So that to me shows that he's really developing the theme of the prophet in general and not Avram himself. Okay. Now we are going to take a leap into the life of Yaakov. Okay, so let me do a little introduction here. This is an excerpt from an essay the Rav wrote called Catharsis. It was published in Tradition in 1978. I'm not exactly sure. It could be some of the essays were presented previously as papers in universities and other places. So I'm not sure if it just first appeared in 1978, or perhaps it was written a little earlier. Just by the way, I posted on my program page, you have a full copy of Catharsis there and 4 other of the Rav's essays. They're all free on Tradition online, even if you don't have an account with them, but I just figured to make it easier for you, I wanted to share those with you. If any of you are inspired after this class or after the course to start reading the Rav, it might be easier to start with his essays because they're shorter and easier to digest as opposed to reading one of his longer works. So let me just give you a little synopsis before we zoom in on what I'm showing you here. So the Rav begins Catharsis by differentiating between koach and gvura. Koach, he says, means when you are acting out of physical strength, you're attacking because you know you are strong, you have the muscles, you have the brawn, etc. Well, when the Torah uses the term gevura, it also means to fight, but when the odds are stacked against you, that requires gevura. It means you have to steel yourself to fight against an enemy that is, at least at first blush, much stronger than you. Or the leap into absurd, a phrase that he borrows from Kierkegaard. It seems crazy. It seems absurd. Like why in the world, or how in the world are you doing this? And he uses Yaakov as an example. So on the page before, he quotes the pasuk. I'll read it in English. Your name shall no longer be called Yaakov, but Yisrael, because you fought with God and with people, and well, it doesn't really mean God. It means an angel here, actually, and you overcame them. Okay, so this is how the Rav explains why Yaakov got the name Yisrael, what he was really doing here. Yaakov had emerged victorious from a most awesome encounter. He had held fast his mysterious foe through a night of sorrow, fear, and loneliness until the new day dawned. Was Jacob's victory something to be expected? Could it have been predicted logically? Was he certain of victory? Okay, just to back up a bit. So this is referring to that night where he crossed the river and met the angel of Esau, on the bank, on the far bank, and he fought him all through the night. And in the morning, he finally overcame him, and the angel asked to be let go. Okay. Was he certain of victory? Of course not. He was alone, weak and unarmed, a novice in the art of warfare. His antagonist was a powerful professional warrior. Why did Jacob not surrender to the foe who attacked him in the dark? Jacob acted absurdly and contrary to all rational, practical considerations. In other words, he acted heroically. He, the lonely and helpless Jacob, dared to engage a mighty adversary in combat. He, who had displayed so much business acumen and the keenness of a pragmatic mind during his long sojourn in Laban's household, suddenly, in the darkness of a grisly, strange night, made the leap into the absurd. He refused to yield to a superior force and declared war upon an invincible enemy. What Jacob manifested was not koach, but gvura, heroism, which is always employed when reason despairs and logic retreats. With daybreak, the helpless, lonely, non-logical Jacob found himself unexpectedly the victor, the hero. The impossible and absurd had triumphed over the possible and logical. Heroism, not logic, won the day. Is this merely the story of one individual's experience? Is it not, in fact, the story of Knesset Yisrael, an entity which is engaged in an absurd struggle for survival of thousands of years? And then in the next section, he goes on to talk about the hero of the Bible, the hero of the Tanakh, and he's contrasting him with the hero of the Greek epic. So he calls these people biblical heroes, biblical heroism, as opposed to the classical hero of mythology. Okay, so I'm putting the question out there. What would you say the Rav is doing here? Is he presenting a typology, a type, a paradigm for us to follow, or is he presenting Yaakov as a human being, as a father, a husband, a son?
This is all of Jewish history, as he said.
Exactly. I feel like, okay, now again, you could argue that, the Rav writes so well that, you really feel like you're there with Yaakov in a way. But especially here, this last paragraph, he's saying this is not the story of one individual experience. It's the story of Knesset Yisrael. So I think that makes this obvious, in my opinion, that this is a typology, or as I called it in the title of this year, an archetype. So I'll use the word archetype when I mean a type for the Avos and beyond. Okay. Yeah, excuse me. Okay, so let's take a look at the next example, which is about Yosef. Now, this I am getting from another book that I don't think I shared with you yet. It's called Vision and Leadership, again from the Torah Sarah Foundation, and it is a combination, reflections on Joseph and Moses. So this is taken from the first half. Okay, so let's take a look at it's from an essay called Yosef the Dreamer. Okay, so I'm going to start from here where the arrow is. Okay, so he is analyzing a trait of Yosef. So actually, the first half, it was quite long, but so that's why I'm not going inside. Of course, feel free to get hold of this book and read it. It's wonderful. By the way, the Torah Harav books are in a way even easier to read than the Rav's essays, because the essays he wrote himself, these are transcribed from his his recordings, his speeches to the public, and he was careful not to use too much philosophical language, so they're just easier to understand. Okay, so the first half of this essay, he talks about Yosef the dreamer, the dreams. I don't have to tell you probably about Yosef and his dreams, but he classifies him as a dreamer. And let's see how else he is describing him here. The second trait of Yosef's character comes to expression in the next part of Yaakov's blessing. And the arms of his hands were ornamented with gold from the hands of the mighty God of Jacob, there, the shepherd, the rock of Israel. Joseph was a very practical man. He organized the Egyptian economy and ran the whole empire. He saved the Egyptian people from the worst famine. He was the statesman par excellence. He knew how to deal with people. He understood human weakness and he knew human nature. However, at the same time, he was a dreamer, a visionary who beheld something beautiful, mysterious. He was fascinated by a world purged and cleansed from evil, a humanity that reached the apex of moral ascent. He dreamt not only of farming, but of stars, winking to him from boundless distances. So here he's comparing and contrasting. On one hand, he was very practical, down to earth, got things done. The other hand, he had these visions, these dreams, these aspirations. Okay, and then, all right, he just continues, and then here. Of course, the Jew represents the same ambivalence. He has inherited Joseph's dual nature. On the one hand, we are very practical people. We are skeptics, very critical of things and events. We examine every phenomenon in the light of matter-of-fact logic, in terms of possibilities and probabilities. We have a down-to-earth approach, and emotions do not sweep us off our feet. On the other hand, like Joseph, we are dreamers, prophets, visionaries, beholding the whole universe, hoping and believing that, even though it is slow in coming, the great day, by Yom Hahu, will finally arrive. And for the sake of that wondrous day, we have heroically defied the whole world and retained our identity. The dual nature of the Jew as realist and visionary has been responsible for our survival. Like Joseph, we can dream and be seers while living in a very pragmatic, scientifically oriented world. Okay, so asking the question again, what is Rav Soloveitchik doing here? How is he presenting Yosef? Archetype or portraiture? When I titled this lecture, Archetype and Portraiture, archetype was the typology, the abstract, the pure possibility of existence. Portraiture is a live, living portrait, a human being. Okay, so in my opinion, he's using Yosef as a paradigm for the Gullus Jew, ourselves, who on one hand, we are very practical. We've learned over the thousands of years how to survive, but yet we retained our vision, our hope of a better future. Okay. And just by the way, I'm just giving you examples of some archetypes, but there are many, many other instances where he uses the Avos as paradigms or archetypes. So, for example, Yosef is also called Hachasid, Hama'ula, in a different article where he contrasts him with Yehuda, who was a man who actually had faults that he had to overcome, and he overcame them. Yosef was the perfect type. Yaakov, he also refers to in other places as the Jew of the double commitment. That's in one of his Mizrahi addresses. The builder of a bridge between two worlds when he goes over that river. And the first Jewish grandfather. Actually, that one, the grandfather one, we'll read either next week or the week after. And Abraham too, he also portrays in different ways. Okay. So now let's take a look at the next one. Okay, so we're back to Abraham, but we are in a different essay in Abraham's journey from Adam to Abraham, the fall and rise of monotheism. Okay, so he's in this part of the essay, he was describing how Abraham discovered God. And here he describing the moment of Abraham's discovery. We can visualize the excitement and the tremor that Abraham experienced when he finally came to the conclusion that there is, behind the millions of stars and flying nebulae, behind the fringes of the orderly and dynamic universe, an omniscient, omnipotent, eternal, and infinite being who created all and sustains his creation. Abraham, in a feat of ecstatic joy, in a state of rapture, completely intoxicated with love and longing, would have fallen on his face and fervently prayed, "Dear God, please show me a sign that you are there, beyond everything, outside of time and space. Please reveal your majesty and splendor. Please say one word to me. Let me hear your voice. Let me see your countenance. Let me feel your breath on my pale, fatigued face. Answer me. Tell all the pagan idol worshippers that you are the creator, Lord and master of the world. Come forward. You can make my task so easy and so simple." However, the Almighty did not respond to Abraham. And I'm going to stop there. Okay, what do you think of this one? What is this a archetypical portrayal, a type, or is it a portraiture sharing how the Rav understood Abraham as a human being?
It sounds like a portraiture, but there may be paradigms within it as well of how a typical person might respond if that's how they felt.
Right. Okay. Very good. So you're saying mostly portraiture, but perhaps one could extract some kind of archetype here. Anyone else?
As
Okay.
usual,
So,
when I
yes.
read his writings, I always feel like he's talking to the populace at the time. So I feel like he's talking about, if you feel Hashem, if you think he's going to answer you, this is what happened with Abraham.
Okay. So again, Tova, that personal piece, I'm going to address a little bit later, of how the Rav connects the Avos to himself, and then how he hopes we will connect ourselves to the Avos. But for now, I would agree with the first speaker that this is really portraiture. It could be that later in the essay he goes on to use part of this as a type, but he's describing a real person. Look how he's attributing feelings to Abraham. This is not even in the Torah. This is in the Medrash, right? How Abraham finally discovered God and what he would have done. He would have fallen on his face and fervently prayed. And he's putting words in his mouth. So to me, when I was first reading these, I just felt like that I was getting to know Avram better through the Rav's viewpoint of him, that he became more real to me because of the way Rav Soloveitchik portrayed him. Okay, let's look at one more example here. Okay, so this is taken from that same essay we looked at last time about Abraham being a paradigm or an archetype for a prophet. Here, he says, on the other hand, eventually the prophet has to come back to society to spread his message. So here he is talking about Abraham as a social being. And I want to look at two bits here. There is another motif in Abraham, one that is just the opposite of the previous. Abraham as a social being, longing for communication. Our lonely father was a loving man with a sincere affection for people. He was lonesome for companionship, the warmth and coziness of a life together. Okay, I'm going to skip a bit and go to the next page. Oh, okay, good. Okay, and now he's talking about, so that was talking about how Abraham wants to connect to the people. Now he wants a child. Abraham wanted a child upon whom to pour out his love and affection. He wanted to love and be loved. He could no longer renounce his social will and the yearning for weeness. He understood very well that friendship cannot grow out of surface communication and pragmatic associations, lovely as they may be. Friendship can only be realized in an inner communion, in existential sharing, in creative relationships, in sympathy. So I remember the first time I read this, and I was just so amazed and impressed by the way the Rav described Abraham's longing for a child. So to me, this is also an example of portraiture, the way he is bringing Avram to life. Not just as Avram Avinu, but Avram, the lonely man, the childless man who is wishing for a child. Okay. And now we are going to go back to Yosef in Vision and Leadership and see the way he describes that fateful moment when Yosef meets his brothers. So he actually is zooming in on this pasuk where it says, "And Joseph remembered the dreams he had dreamt about them." And it also says earlier that he recognized his brothers, and it already said it. It said it twice. So he then shares some different interpretations. Perhaps even though he recognized them, they didn't recognize him. Evan Ezra says one thing, Rashi says another, but let's see what the Rav says about what is going on. I would suggest a slightly different interpretation. These verses tell us about two identifications. The first identification was based on past experiences, the same people, the same characters, the same excitability, the same quick tempers, the same ruthless natures, and so on. Consequently, the memories of past years, all the pain, all the chicanery, all the beatings, and all the abuse he had taken were awakened. Willy-nilly, his wrath was kindled. By the way, the Rav loves the word willy-nilly. He uses it a lot, meaning in spite of himself. He disguised himself as a stranger and treated them harshly because he felt estranged from them. The Torah continues to tell us that he recognized them later as brothers. Watching their faces and studying their countenances, he discovered a change. Levi and Shimon's faces had softened. They did not reflect ferocity and hardness. There was a different glimpse in their eyes. The steely gray eyes had turned blue, dreamy. Yehuda's face had matured. There was a firmness and determination in his features. They all looked as if they were suffering from a depressive mood, as if they lacked inner peace, as if some grisly fear haunted them. In a word, they had come here with a contrite heart and humble, repenting spirit, but they did not recognize the kindness and graciousness that radiated from Joseph's face. So I think we all would agree that the way he's portraying Yosef and his brothers is portraiture here. He is putting in Yosef's feelings in his heart of his memories of, on one hand, he remembers all the suffering he had at their hands, but now watching them, he saw a difference, even to imagining what color eyes they had. So again, it doesn't mean, that the Rav truly believed that the gray went to the blue, but he is actually, the way I understand it, he is actually picturing Yosef and his brothers in his mind, both, physically and emotionally. Okay, so that leads me now to a question which I'm going to start the answer, give you a taste of the answer now, but the main answer will come next week. How was Rav Soloveitchik able to do this? How could he possibly imagine the Avos as real people? Was it just, like I mentioned at the beginning, just the power of his imagination, or was it something more? So I am going to submit that it was something more. It really was based on the way he viewed time, historical time, and the Masorah community. So we are going to take a quick dip into a new book that we haven't looked at before called The Emergence of Ethical Man. Also a Torah Sarav Foundation book, which is a little different than the others because it's actually, they found a untouched, unpublished, perhaps even unedited manuscript after the Rav's Petira. And they published it. It is missing the end, so you don't have the final resolution, but it's a fascinating depiction of man as a natural being. He kind of compares him to a plant and then to an animal, and then finally he reaches the charismatic stage. So that is the part I'm going into the end of it. Okay, so he's talking about charismatic man. Now, the Rav uses the word charisma a lot, not quite in the way we understand it, it's actually a Christian term, and it can mean a gift or a divine gift, especially for a leader. We understand it as the ability to influence, which is indeed something important. But he also talks about the charismatic community, and by that he means the Jewish people. Okay, so he has an interesting question here. First, he says the charismatic personality, he's talking about Abraham now, develops the awareness of historical persistence and continuity. Let us inquire into the life of our father of our nation. And Hashem said to Avram, after Lot was separated from him, lift up now your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward, eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, to you will I give it, and to your seed forever. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and the breadth of it, for I will give it to you. And later on, he says, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur Kasdim to give you this land to inherit it. And now a question. A question arises immediately. Abraham never took possession of the land, and he never exercised any dominion over it. How could God promise him the land without fulfilling his words? Lecha ulazaracha. So not just lazaracha, not just to your seed, but lecha, to you. God emphasized, Lecha etnena ulazaracha. I shall give the land to you in person and to your children. So he says the answer to the question we find in Exodus and Shemos, and I have also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of the sojournings in which they sojourned, and I will bring you into the land which I swore to give you, to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you for a heritage. I am the Lord. So really, this oath was not fulfilled in the lifetime of Abraham. It was fulfilled many centuries later. So what does the Rav say? But yet the land was specifically given to Avram. Apparently, to you will I give it, and to your seed means I shall give it, the land to you, by having your children inherit it. Avraham indeed inherited the land, but on a historical level, on which the dead and the living form one community and temporal instance loses its meaning. Abraham will acquire the land through a conquest of hundreds of years later. Okay, so you're following me that there is a direct connection between the Avram and us. So if something happens to us, it's happening to him too. There is a quasi-mystical communion between him and his descendants. The charismatic community, that means the Jewish community, is again historically conscious, the past reliving and integrating itself with the chosen individual who founded the nation. Abraham projects his existence upon a historical background and introduces it to the everlasting community, into a mysterious future, reaching out beyond the confines of its natural existence. There is an act of self-transcendence. Abraham exceeds the boundary line of individual temporal existence, temporal meaning timely, meaning like finite, and reaches out into the open, unlimited spaces of historical existence or eternal existence. So somehow Abraham immortalized himself. He lives on in the continuous historical series which he sponsored. He lives in the community and in the covenant. If I use a mystical term, I would say the historical covenant community is the continuous incarnation of its father. So basically, as we continue in the tradition of Abraham, if we walk in his ways, if we continue in his path, we are, in a sense, reincarnating him within ourselves. So therefore, when we inherited the land, when we came into Eretz Yisrael, Abraham acquired it too. And next week, Yetz Hashem, I will delve more deeply into this interesting view that Rav has of time and the historical community, so we will understand better how he is able to bring the Avos to life, since they are all within us. Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments?
Yes, I would say that charismatic man is a personification of the biblical heroes as mythological heroes. This is a theme that I attribute to the Rav in a poem of mine which was published in the Times of Israel called The Mythology of the Past, which you can read if you go to the Times of Israel. website.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I'm just going to ask again. Oh, yes. Someone start talking?
A question. Maybe what you did with Abraham, that his children are inheriting and not him, is sort of reminds me of Adam. On the day you eat it, you shall surely die, and it doesn't happen. So this is a common problem with a lot of religions, that something is promised and it's the next world or the next generation. It's not actually fulfilled with Abraham. And if we want to combine Abraham not inheriting directly with the Chazal view of some, that Abraham didn't pass his 10 tests, therefore he wasn't worthy of inheriting it. And maybe the lesson is that one person, no matter how good, could never be worthy of it, but a collective like what Moses brought is worthy of it. I mean, there are
Okay.
different ways of looking at it without it, because we're inferring things that are or aren't necessarily in the text.
Right. Okay. That's a fascinating insight. I would just point out that here the Rav is looking also, and we'll see this a little bit more next week, not just from our point of view, but from Avram's point of view. That we could look back at Avram and say, oh, it doesn't look like he inherited it, we're inheriting it for him. But he is also making the point that Avraham can look ahead. And in some sense, he knew that through his progeny inheriting, then in a sense, he inherited right then and there.
But as they say, that's a chatzikos nechama.
Okay. You know, Ari, we can all respond to this in our own way. So I just wanted to ask one more time, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but the person last week, I forgot, I didn't see her name, who shared with us that she had a personal relationship with Tanya Soloveitchik. Are you here today? Okay. Maybe next time. And okay, so I will see you all next week. Amiat Hashem, it was wonderful. Thank you, those of you who
Thank you so much.
responded, and those of you who didn't. If I'll just
Thank
end
you.
off. You're welcome. One of the goals of this class is not just you should understand my ideas here, and of course, you know, you can disagree, but my real goal is that if any of you who never read the Rav Inside are inspired to pick up one of his essays, his books, listen to one of his recordings, and learn more of his Torah, then it all would have been worthwhile. All right. Have a great day, everybody, and a wonderful week. Thank you very much.
Toda rabba.
Okay.
Thank you.